California is one of the most popular states in the U.S., known for its sunny beaches, technology companies, and opportunities. For some people, California becomes a place where their dreams of a better life come true. People come here in search of work, education, new opportunities, and prospects. They're willing to work hard to achieve their goals and realize their ambitions. Some of them become successful entrepreneurs, artists, or athletes, and some find happiness in family life. Not all dreams are meant to come true. For some, California becomes a place of disappointment and dashed hopes. Maribel Ramos worked in security at a department store after high school and had a long-term goal of joining law enforcement. She would need a college degree, though, and, to afford that, she joined the Army. Maribel served 2 combat tours in Iraq and was about to graduate from Cal State Fullerton with a degree in criminal justice in the spring of 2013. Friends reported Maribel Ramos missing on May 3, 2013, when she was a no-show at scheduled events. She was last seen on video dropping off her rent check. Maribel shared an Orange, California apartment with a roommate, Kwang Chol KC Joy. Adding an eerie layer of mystery was the fact that Maribel reached out to 911 a week and a half before vanishing. She said she was scared in the recorded call and that she'd take desperate measures to protect herself. Maribel Ramos, a 36-year-old U.S. Army veteran, aimed to transition back to civilian life after 8 years of service. She knew what she wanted to achieve and had the determination and tenacity to do it. After finishing her military career, Maribel readily shifted her focus to other facets of life. One of her big decisions was to go to university. She moved into an apartment with her mother in Orange, California, and lived there until her mother died in 2009. With the apartment to herself, Maribel reached out to her sister, Lucy Gonzalez, to see if she would move in. Unfortunately, Lucy turned her down, explaining that she and her daughter were settled where they were, but that they would move in if Maribel couldn't find a roommate. Maribel decided to put out an ad on Craigslist for a new roommate, and soon received a handful of inquiries. But one stood out. A man named Kwang Chol Joy reached out to Maribel to inquire about the apartment. In his message, Kwang described himself as an easygoing man looking for a place to stay while he searched for a job in Huntington Beach. After meeting with Kwang, both Maribel and Lucy Gonzalez determined him to be a quiet, well-mannered man. He also told the sisters that he had never been married and had no children. For Maribel, who was close to finishing her degree, the peace that might come with having a quiet, solitary roommate seemed too good to pass up. In the weeks after Kwang moved in with Maribel Ramos, it became clear that he truly didn't have anyone in his life. Kwang was constantly at home by himself and very rarely left the apartment. Before long, Maribel started inviting Kwang to family events. As he accompanied Maribel to these dinners, games, and parties, he got to know most of her family. Gradually, Maribel Ramos's relationship with Kwang morphed into a friendship. The two regularly walked their dogs and went on grocery runs together. On May 3, 2013, Maribel Ramos failed to appear at a weekly softball game, something that was out of character for her. Maribel's family and friends tried several times to contact her, but all attempts were unsuccessful. The family checked her apartment, but she was not there. Unable to find her, they reported her missing, and the authorities immediately launched an investigation. The police went to the address where Maribel lived. When they arrived, they saw her car parked next to the house, but when they knocked on the door, no one answered. The neighbors interviewed said they had not seen or heard anything suspicious. Everything looked perfectly normal from the outside. The officers did not see any broken windows or other signs of a break-in. They decided to go inside and see if Maribel needed help. At first glance, everything in the house remained in its place. There was absolutely no indication that any crime had occurred there. However, the light in Maribel's bedroom was on. The bed was unmade, and one of the pillows had no pillowcase. It was rather strange. According to Lucy, her sister would never leave such a mess. An inspection of the room showed that Maribel hadn't intended to go on any trips. All her clothes were in place. The only things missing were her cell phone, wallet, and ID. Considering Maribel's car was parked near the house, the investigators had certain suspicions. Maribel Ramos had undergone extensive military training. She was a disciplined person. Maribel was not the type to just disappear without a trace, so this atypical behavior made everyone think she was in trouble. When the investigators arrived at the house, Maribel's neighbor, Kwang Chol Joy, appeared unexpectedly. He reported that he had last seen Maribel the previous day around 10 p.m. He had gone for a walk at that time and returned an hour later, but Maribel was already gone. Surveillance footage from 8:15 p.m. on the evening before her disappearance showed Maribel dropping off her rent check. It was the last time she was seen in public. She dropped off the envelope and left. The video does not show her being scared or worried about anything. She was in no hurry and appeared completely calm. While the investigators were reviewing all available video footage, Maribel's family decided to turn to social media for help. They posted a picture of Maribel online and asked people who had any information about her whereabouts to contact them. They wanted to involve as many people as possible in the search. The investigators tried to trace Maribel's cell phone, but it was off. While looking into her personal life, the police discovered that she had recently been in a romantic relationship with a man named Paul Lopez. He was the last person to speak to Maribel on the phone the day before she disappeared. So he, of course, had to appear at the police station to answer some questions. Paul acted very confident. He said that he and Maribel had just started to develop a relationship and had not gotten close enough yet. Paul also said that he was dating other women. When asked if Maribel had dated anyone other than him, Paul said he had not asked her about it. Paul also confirmed that the last time he spoke to Maribel on the phone was Thursday evening. Paul said he worked for the gas company and was on shift from 4 p.m. until midnight, so they did not see each other on Thursday. The investigators noticed that Paul was cooperative, but there was no guarantee he was telling the truth. However, Paul's truck was equipped with a GPS tracker. The officers were able to track all his movements that night. According to this data, Paul was nowhere near Maribel Ramos's home. When the investigators interviewed Paul, he mentioned Kwang, Maribel's roommate. Paul said that Maribel's relationship with Kwang had recently soured. She often mentioned her roommate in conversations, complaining that he didn't have enough money to pay the rent on time. Moreover, when Paul spoke to Maribel on Thursday, the latter was arguing with Kwang. Paul heard Maribel telling Kwang that she wanted him to move out. She told him that he had to move out the next day. Being on speakerphone, Paul told Kwang he would force him and his stuff out if he didn't move out the next day. Paul offered Maribel his help and said he would stop by if necessary, but she replied there was no need for that and that she was going to bed. That was their last conversation. After learning about the disagreements between Maribel and Kwang, the investigators focused all their attention on him. Kwang was 54 years old. He came to the United States from South Korea as a teenager. He didn't have any significant offenses on his record, and there was nothing to indicate that he had a criminal past. However, digging into his life, they discovered a history marred by anger. According to his sister, Kwang had such a violent temper that she filed a restraining order against him. Checking his social media accounts showed that he and Maribel Ramos were quite close. However, when the investigators spoke with Maribel's family, it turned out that her relationship with Kwang was not as perfect as it looked in numerous photos on social media. It seemed like Maribel Ramos and Kwang had the perfect roommate situation until Kwang decided he wanted more. In the summer of 2012, Lucy Gonzalez received a call from Kwang. He confessed to her that he was in love with Maribel and that he wanted to marry her and have kids with her. Stunned, Lucy Gonzalez told Kwang that while he was deserving of what he was looking for, Maribel was not interested in him in that way. Lucy later told Maribel about the phone call and advised her to reject Kwang quickly before the situation got out of hand. Maribel reportedly spoke to Kwang and made it clear that she was not romantically interested in him. At first, it seemed as if Kwang had taken the rejection well, but over time, he started turning to drastic measures in an apparent attempt to change Maribel Ramos's mind. He bought a whole new wardrobe, got a tattoo, paid to take Maribel on a cruise, and even reportedly spent more than $10,000 on plastic surgery to look younger. It soon became clear that Kwang Chol Joy's relationship with Maribel Ramos had shifted from amicable to obsessive. Eventually, the police uncovered a gruesome piece of evidence: a frantic phone call Maribel made to 911 only 12 days before her disappearance. In the call, Maribel claimed to feel unsafe around her roommate, saying, "I'm just calling to let you guys know that if something happens that I did it because I was trying to defend myself."
Orange Police. Okay, well, I just want to let you know that I have a roommate that should be leaving at the end of the month. We had a conversation today that he kind of freaked me out. I'm not feeling comfortable around him anymore. I'm feeling threatened.
What's your name?
My name is Maribel. My name is
What's your last name, Maribel?
Ramos Ariel.
Okay.
At the end of the month, I want him to leave, and from now until then, I just feel like I have to lock my door, which I will, because he sounded like he would hurt me. Like, it was weird.
Why are you crying?
Because I'm afraid.
What? Your roommate?
I'm not comfortable with him anymore. I'm just like calling so that you guys know that if something happens, that I did it because I was trying to defend myself.
This conversation was recorded 12 days before Maribel Ramos disappeared, and the fact that she, having good physical training, was afraid of Kwong meant that there were reasons for this. As already mentioned, Maribel served 2 combat tours in Iraq. Perhaps she had some kind of psychological problems because of this. Military personnel have to face many difficulties, and this later often affects their civilian life. To figure out what happened between Maribel and Kwong, the investigators called him in for questioning. He seemed calm and friendly. Kwong said Maribel was a close person to him and that he was very worried about her disappearance. According to Kwong, he was Maribel's roommate for about a year and a half, and they had a great time together. They went on a cruise together, danced at the clubs, and had fun at parties. However, the investigators knew things were not as perfect as Kwong said, and asked him to explain Maribel's 911 call. Kwong stated that they had gone to karaoke together that night and had an argument. He claimed that when Maribel drank alcohol, she was usually either very friendly or aggressive. According to Kwong, at some point that evening, she started yelling at him and saying that she did not like him and was not attracted to him. He replied that he did not understand the essence of the problem because they were having a good time. After that, she called 911. When asked about the last time they argued or quarreled with each other, Kwong said he and Maribel had a fight on Thursday evening over the rent. Kwong thought the detectives should take a closer look at Paul. According to Kwong, the last time he saw Maribel was around 9 p.m. when he went out for a car ride to calm down after an argument. When he returned home, Maribel was no longer there, and he believed that either Paul had picked her up or someone else had because her car was still there. Kwong's story seemed convincing, but one detail in his appearance troubled the investigators. He was wearing a t-shirt, and the investigators saw big scratches on his arms. They looked quite fresh. When asked to explain the origin of the scratches, Kwong stated that he was walking in the park and scratched himself on some bushes. Although this seemed suspicious, there was no evidence that Kwong was involved in Maribel's disappearance at this investigation stage, so he was released. The investigation into the disappearance of Maribel Ramos hit a dead end a few days after it began. As time went on, the chances of finding her alive were decreasing. In search of any new clues, the detectives decided to involve forensic experts for a detailed inspection of the house where Maribel lived. They hoped modern technology would help them discover what could not be seen with the naked eye. At this time, Kwong was actively cooperating with the police. He allowed them to search his rental car without a warrant. For a more detailed examination, the authorities also used a police dog trained to search for human remains. However, the dog did not detect any scent in the house, Maribel's car, or Kwong's car. Meanwhile, in the days after Maribel Ramos's disappearance, Kwong was spending a lot of time online, commenting on online forums related to Maribel Ramos's case to declare how much he missed his friend. But despite his attempts to appear as the grieving roommate online, Kwong had strangely started distancing himself from Maribel's family he had previously called friends. He also refused to participate in most of the vigils and searches for Maribel. Kwong gave numerous interviews in which he claimed to be cooperating with the police. This behavior alerted the investigators, and they decided to set up 24-hour surveillance on him, hoping he would make a mistake and lead them to Maribel. Kwong visited the public library to get online because he had given his phone and laptop to the police. To find out what he was doing there, the detectives requested surveillance footage. At first glance, there was nothing unusual about his behavior. He took a laptop and used it like other visitors. After spending about 2 hours there, he returned the laptop and left. The detectives couldn't wait to check the browser history on the laptop he was using. But, as it turned out, after visitors returned their laptops, their browser history was cleared to preserve their privacy. This was another disappointment for the police, who were doing their best to find Maribel. There are moments in everyone's life when the world seems to fall apart. This is exactly what happened to Maribel Ramos's family when she suddenly disappeared. No one knew where she had gone, or what might have happened. Her family was desperate. They put up flyers all over town, hoping someone had seen her or knew something about her whereabouts. However, this was not enough. The family realized they needed to use modern technology to spread the word. They created a social media account detailing the situation and asking for help from anyone who might know something about Maribel. Thanks to the family's actions on social media, there was soon a break in the case. About 2 weeks had passed since Maribel's disappearance, but the police still had no idea where she had gone. However, events took an unexpected turn. On May 16th, Maribel's family announced on social media that they were planning an awareness walk and a search for Maribel in Peters Canyon. At the same time, the detectives learned that Kwong had returned the car he had rented. This seemed strange to them, and although they had checked that car before, they decided to search it again. Let me remind you that during the initial search, a dog trained to find human remains did not pick up any scents in Kwong's car. But this time, a dog reacted quickly to the smell in the trunk. Even though this was not enough to arrest Kwong, it became clear to the detectives that they were moving in the right direction. When Kwong read on Facebook that Maribel's family was planning a walk and search in Peters Canyon, he went to the library to use a laptop again. However, he did not suspect that the police had obtained a warrant that gave them remote access to the laptop Kwong was using. The detectives saw what information he was looking for on their monitor. Kwong's search queries included the one about how long it takes for a human body to decay. After that, he used Google Maps and found the place in Peters Canyon where Maribel's family had set up a meeting for those who wanted to join the search. He then zoomed out and zoomed in again on a seemingly unremarkable patch of Modjeska Canyon. The location he studied on Google Maps was 10 miles from Peters Canyon. At that moment, the officers watching his actions could not believe their eyes. Everyone had just one thought. Had Kwong just shown them the place where he hid Maribel's body? Without wasting a minute, the investigators went to that area. As you can see, this is a pretty secluded place with no houses nearby. After 30 minutes of searching, the police discovered a shallow grave. They had no doubt whose remains they had found, but still had to wait for the results of the forensic examination. On May 17th, the police arrived at Maribel's apartment to arrest Kwong. When he saw the officers approaching, he tried to flee by jumping out of the window but was still arrested and taken to the police station. Now, Kwong no longer looked like the nice and confident person he had seemed before. He continued to insist that he was not involved in Maribel's disappearance and that he did not know where she was. He didn't know yet that the police had found the remains. The forensic experts identified the victim using dental records. The remains found belonged to Maribel Ramos. Due to factors such as weather conditions, the level of decomposition, and the body being in the habitat of various animals, it was impossible to determine the exact cause of her death. Kwong was charged with multiple counts. Death is always a tragedy that leaves an indelible mark in the hearts of the deceased person's loved ones. The family of Maribel Ramos faced this tragedy when their beloved daughter and sister suddenly disappeared. They didn't know what had happened or where she might be. They put up flyers all over the city, created a social media page detailing the situation, and asked for help from anyone who might know anything about Maribel. But 2 weeks after she disappeared, the family's hopes came crashing down. They had to go through grief, pain, and despair. But they found the strength to move on. They remember Maribel and they love her. The trial took place in 2014. Because Maribel Ramos's remains were too decomposed to determine her cause of death, the authorities were left only to speculate how Kwang might have taken her life. The prosecutors alleged that Joy was in love with Maribel Ramos, who did not feel the same way about him. Kwang and Maribel argued on May 2, 2013, about rent. Given that Maribel had combat training and could have easily overtaken Kwang in a fair fight, they hypothesized that Kwang must have ambushed her. The investigators suggested he snuck into her room in the middle of the night and smothered her in her sleep. He then put her body in the trunk of his rented car and drove her to a remote location. There, he had to make his way through stretched barbed wire, which left scratches on his hands. Since the police dog did not detect the scent during the initial search of Kwang's car, there was a possibility that he had transported Maribel's body more than once. But there was no evidence for this theory. There was very little forensic evidence tying Kwang to the crime. However, during his trial, the jury heard how Kwang had become obsessed with Maribel, how Maribel had called the police to report that she was afraid of Kwang, and how Kwang had pinpointed the exact site of her burial on Google Maps. Kwang pleaded not guilty. At the trial, he stated, "Family wants me to apologize, which I cannot apologize for something I haven't done. Maybe someday truth will come out. Maybe I'll just die inside prison. I miss Maribel more than anyone. I think about it. I've been here about 440 days in the jail. I think about it almost every day." He also said he never Googled the location of the gravesite in Modjeska Canyon. "No," he said. "In my assumption, I was set up, straightforward." Kwang said they did go on one cruise together, but slept in separate beds. "We always maintained we were good friends. We were platonic friends. She was like my sister," he said. When asked who took Maribel's life, he replied that he did not know. Kwang's lawyer, Adam Vining, called him odd during his opening statement but insisted that his client had nothing to do with Maribel's death. "A crime will be proven here," said Adam Vining. "And the crime that will be proven here is improper disposal of a body." Vining said Ramos returned from her years of combat with PTSD, and she was prone to paranoia. He also floated the theory that she may have died of a medical condition. The prosecutors agreed it was a circumstantial case. The key evidence was Kwang's internet search at a public library, zooming in on the very place where Maribel Ramos's body was found. On July 30, 2014, Kwang Chol Joy was found guilty of second-degree life deprivation. He was sentenced to 15 years to life. Kwang sent dozens of letters to the judge declaring his innocence.